The ARRL, or the American Radio Relay League, is the American equivalent of the Radio Society of Great Britain. And David is the Secretary and the Chief Executive of the ARRL. So we thought, who better to tell us about life with radio over the pond than David, K1ZZ. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you very much, David. And let me make sure I'm on my mark here. Well, good evening. It's wonderful to be here in Norwich, and I will explain in just a minute why I feel especially happy to be here. Is the audio all right? Are the levels okay? You can hear me in the back? I see nods and thumbs up. Okay, we're good to go then. Okay, I want to do three things tonight. I want to talk about amateur radio as it's practiced in the United States across the pond. I want to explain a little bit about the American Radio Relay League and in particular our centennial year, which we're celebrating this year. I want to compare and contrast, I hope through some questions that you may have for me, how amateur radio is practiced in the U.S. Vis-a-vis here in the UK. And I hope we can get a bit of a dialogue going on that and see what's different, what's the same, and what we can learn from one another. And finally, I just want to show you, courtesy of Chris G0DWV, who came to visit Linda and me at our station, K1ZZ, and Linda is K1ZZ. Chris came to visit last May, right after the Dayton Hamvention, and took a lot of photos, of which I've selected a tiny handful to share with you tonight. Chris told me he would be here tonight, but that he has to be in Friedrichshafen already in order to set up the RSGB stand tomorrow. I'm fortunate enough to have an advance team doing that for me, so Linda and I were able to come by way of Norwich tonight. So first of all, just a little bit about myself and why am I here? Well, first of all, whoops, wrong button. Definitely the wrong button. Okay. First of all, I'm here because I was invited. And I thank you very much for that, Paul and Roger. That arose at the RSGB Centenary Observance last July, where I attended as one of the ARRL representatives to congratulate your National Society on making it to 100 years. And Paul approached me and said, say, do you ever consider coming to speak at the Norfolk Amateur Radio Club in Norwich? And I said, well, yes, as a matter of fact, Paul, I would be delighted to consider that. And of course, I know a few of you, and so part of that reason was because I wanted to get to see you, and part of it was because I wanted to meet even more of you. But there was an underlying reason as well. I have wanted to come to Norwich since I was 10 years old. Now, I suspect that you haven't heard a lot of people say that, so let me explain what I mean. In 1959, the city of my birth, Norwich, Connecticut, celebrated its 300th anniversary, its tercentenary. Now, I realize by your standards, that's pretty recent history. But for us, it was a significant event. And in fact, the Lord Mayor of Norwich came to help us celebrate that event. And there was a big parade. I mean, to the eyes of a 10-year-old, it was a big parade. I'm not sure exactly how big it was compared to a coronation or what have you, but it was quite a noteworthy event in my young life, and so I started thinking, gee, Norwich, England, I didn't know how to pronounce it at the time, have trouble even today. And you must understand that although we have very little originality in Connecticut when it comes to place names, we do have some originality when it comes to pronunciation. Linda and I live in a small rural town called Coventry. Getting back to Norwich, Connecticut, it is it's at a point where two rivers come together, the Yantic and the Shetucket rivers. Those are Indian names. We borrow from everybody we can. And they come together at Norwich and become the Thames River. So, as you can see, but we don't pick only on the nation from whose language we desecrate. We also do the same to the French. There is a small village near Norwich, Connecticut, which we call Versailles. So anyway, I couldn't very well pass up the opportunity to visit the original Norwich. And if you want to correct my pronunciation, please do it later. Thank you. I became interested in amateur radio and first became active on the air from Norwich as K1ZZ as a novice, and then K1ZZ as my first full call sign. K1ZZ in 1976. ZZ is a very good double-letter combination, by the way. I notice a couple of you also have very good taste in that regard. I joined the full-time ARRL staff after some summer jobs and brief part-time jobs in 1972. That was a long time ago, before many of you were born, I can say. And in 1982, the ARRL Board of Directors elected me general manager. That was the title at the time. The titles have changed, but the function has remained the same. I'm responsible to the ARRL Board of Directors for the operation of the headquarters. And we'll get into a little bit later a bit more of what all of that entails. I've been involved in the International Amateur Radio Union, which is the federation of national amateur radio societies, of which RSGB is a very important component, since 1974. So that's 40 years. And that was my first visit, actually, to the UK, was in connection with a trip for IARU. There was at the time, some of you old-timers might remember Roy Stevens' G2BVN. Steve was very key volunteer in RSGB and IARU, very involved in technical publications at the time for the society. And he was the secretary of IARU Region 1, which is all of Europe, the former Soviet Union, Africa, and a good part of the Middle East. And Steve, as Secretary of Region 1, was the key individual in the region at the time. And so the deal that my boss at ARRL at the time, where we are the International Secretariat for IARU, the deal that he had with Steve was if we went to Europe or anywhere in Region 1, we were to report to Steve on our way back. And so London became my last stop on a trip through Eastern Europe. And it was quite a memorable event for me, meeting Steve down on what's currently, I guess what's now called the Embankment down in London. So I've been fortunate to be back many times since then to the UK, but this is my very first time in East Anglia or anywhere in this vicinity, so I'm really, really pleased to have this opportunity. A little bit about ARRL. As it's already been mentioned, it's the American equivalent to RSGB. In fact, RSGB claims to be a year older. That's a slight dig because they actually started as, I believe, the London Wireless Society and then changed the name a bit later. But that's okay, we don't quarrel, because actually the Wireless Institute of Australia claims the longest streak back to 1910. And so we both defer to WIA when it comes to being the elder statesman in worldwide amateur radio. The mission of the ARRL, and this is, I like terse expressions, and I like this one very much. The Board of Directors adopted this just a few years ago, to promote and advance the art, science, and enjoyment of amateur radio. And I feel that each of those three is equally important. The art, the science, and the enjoyment. Because if this is an avocation, for various reasons, we sometimes try to avoid the word hobby because it seems to, in the US at least, we like to think of ourselves as a service, and I'll get more into that in a bit. But it's an avocation, it's a hobby, and if you're not enjoying it, why are you doing it? So enjoyment is a big part of what we try to promote. ARRL currently has a little over 164,000 members. About 10,000 of those are outside the United States, and I know there are several of you here in the room who are ARRL members, and I appreciate your support very much. It's part of what makes amateur radio strong, not just in the United States, but worldwide, because through supporting ARRL as the IARU International Secretariat, you're supporting all of amateur radio worldwide, as you are as an RSGB member. ARRL is enjoying currently our 8th straight year of membership growth. Now, this is not the norm in national amateur radio societies around the world. That's one or two of those years it was very small growth, but nonetheless it was growth. And we're in the 8th straight year right now, and I'm pretty sure that it will continue for a while until we have to raise the dues. The dues have been flat at $39 a year ever since 2001. So that's 13 years since we've had a dues increase. As CEO, I like to think that good management and fiscal responsibility has something to do with it. I think it does. Some of it has to do with the fact that we have some members who are very generous in making voluntary contributions to the association. And even so, it's not something that we will be able to continue indefinitely. $39 a year right now translates, I believe, to about 23 pounds sterling. And that's the price of an ARRL membership for you if you receive QST magazine in digital form. If you want the magazine in print, as you have some copies here, it, of course, is more because we have to mail it to you. But the digital edition is, I think, quite good. Paula was giving me some pointers earlier this afternoon about how we could improve the video content. And we'll talk more, Paul. But we will continue to refine that product and to find better ways of bringing news information, promotion of amateur radio to members through electronic means as well as print. Print QST is not going to go away in the foreseeable future. It's just not part of any of our plans. We are very fortunate to have very strong support of advertisers. We are running completely counter to the trend in print advertising. We have been able to hold steady with our print advertising sales, and as long as the advertisers support the magazine, it will come to members in print form. There's just no question about that. So a little bit about amateur radio in the United States. we have right now 723,000 licensed radio amateurs, licensed by the FCC. I can't say that they're all in the United States because, as Vic will attest here, some of them live in other countries, N0FEI, but they are all licensees of record. About half of the licensees are technician class licensees, which means we have a three-tier structure. It's slightly different from your three-tier structure. The first level is the technician license, which is primarily VHF. It's full VHF privileges with very limited HF privileges. Then we have a general license, which is privileges on all of the HF amateur bands, but not all of the frequencies in the band. But there are no power distinctions among the licensees. And the top class we call amateur extra class, which has full privileges. Today, extras are about one amateur in 5. And as you can see, generals are about 1 amateur in 4. There are 2 classes of license that are no longer issued, but are still held by licensees and can be renewed. The advanced, Linda has an advanced license, and advanced licensees are disappearing as, because there are no new licenses being issued, and they are upgrading as well. And our old novice class, which at the time I came into amateur radio 52 years ago, that was the route of entry into amateur radio, was the novice license. And you spent your time battling incredible competition and interference on Morse code with crystal-controlled transmitters. It's a wonder that any of us stuck it out. But that license is no longer available. It's the technician that is the route into amateur radio in the United States. As I mentioned, that includes an unknown number of non-residents. I mean, at Friedrichshafen, I will be seeing many, many amateurs go by with their dual call sign badges, their European call sign and a US call sign along with it, because you can take the exam without coming to the United States. You just need 3 volunteer examiners who are qualified to give the exam, and you can take out a American amateur license. And because it's a license with a 10-year term and there's no fee for renewal, unless you have what we call a vanity call sign, where you get to choose your call sign, you do have to pay for that. That costs less than $2 a year to have that, so it's quite reasonable. But if you just have the call sign the FCC computer issued you, you can renew it indefinitely without paying anything. So as a result of that, we do have a lot of inactive licensees. We have people who hold call signs who are not regularly active on the air. How many? Who knows? It's probably a bit more than half of our licensees. We don't talk a lot about that because when we go to Washington to talk to FCC personnel, to talk to congressmen, we want to say we represent the interests of 723,000 people. That sounds a lot better than even 186,000, or 168,000, sorry, little dyslexia there, members of ARRL. So what do the amateurs who are active do on the air? Well, a lot of what they do are what you do. But we have a very strong emphasis on public service and emergency communications. Now, I know that you have that activity here in the UK as well with RayNet, and I'm sure that in most local clubs you will have some component of a public service activity using your VHF and repeaters and so on. Even amateur television, I'm sure, comes into play there. In the US, it's the primary reason that people become licensed. We have historically been a technical hobby and still are. You have to understand the technology in order to be of value in an emergency. Just having the license doesn't do it. You have to be skilled using the equipment. You have to understand how it works. There was years ago a popular American television program called MacGyver, and it featured someone who was always able to solve whatever the problem of the moment was by haywiring something together. And our current ARRL president, K3KN, likes to describe us as the MacGyvers of communications, because it is the skills that you learn not by becoming licensed, but by being active as a licensee that makes you valuable. And that's not just us saying that. The United Nations World Food Program, which provides most of the communications for UN agencies out of distressed areas, relies very heavily on radio amateurs. They recruit radio amateurs to jobs in the World Food Program because they know exactly that. They know that if they drop this person into the middle of some war zone or former war zone to provide communications for refugees to get supplies in, that whatever the conditions are they discover on the ground, they will figure out how to communicate. And that remains a very valuable skill even in a country that we sometimes like to think of as developed, the United States. But we have a lot of areas where a lot of the geographic area of the United States is not well served by commercial communications or even by public safety organizations. So we still have a role in that. Oops, wrong button again. There's also, of course, an important personal communications component. Now, part of that is related to emergencies. People like to know that they will be able to reach their family members even if the cell phone network goes down. So there are people who come into amateur radio with that as their intent, to just have that lifeline of communications within their families and their immediate friends. And that's fine, because many of them ultimately discover that there's a lot more to amateur radio than that. And so we get some very good radio amateurs coming in through that motivation. Of course, amateurs in the US operate mobile, operate portable. You may have seen some photos of some truly weird mobile installations from time to time. Not everyone has 14 microphones hanging off the dashboard, but I have seen it. And portable operation is, as I think it is here as well, with Summits on the Air, as I guess that's not a big activity in East Anglia, but in other parts of the UK, I know it is. In fact, the program was invented here in the UK, as was Islands on the Air. So there's a lot of interest in just packing up. I call it the ham shack in a backpack, where you can just put equipment in the backpack, head off for an afternoon, hike for a while, throw a wire in the tree, and talk to the world. It's a great activity, a great way to combine outdoor activity and amateur radio. One of Linda's particular enthusiasms is 10 gigahertz, and the main reason is it gets us out of the house. It gets us out into the seashores or mountaintops, mountainsides, to get a bit of fresh air and join some very, very welcoming people in that technical side of amateur radio. Okay, DXing, contesting, awards chasing, these are all important activities. They get people on the air, they build skills, they encourage us to improve our stations. A very significant area of growth right now is in narrowband digital communications, HF narrowband digital. By that I mean PSK31, JT65, JT9, MFSK16. It's the whole alphabet soup of different modes that have been developed by amateurs. Peter Martin as G3PLX invented PSK31, and it's now an ITU standard alphabet for radio communication. And these modes are very, very bandwidth efficient. They use only a few hertz of the HF radio spectrum. You can work very long distances with very low power, very simple antennas using the signal processing power of a computer to pull the signal out of the noise. And it's a great way of combining an interest in computers with an interest in RF radio communications. And of course, home construction. That is still an important part of amateur radio. In fact, it's enjoying a renaissance right now because we have, and I'm sure you have examples here as well of what's called the maker movement, where people just enjoy making things. Not necessarily electronic, but often electronic, often combining electrical, mechanical, and electronic projects into things that just do neat stuff. Some of them are useful, some of them are just, gee, isn't it neat that we can do that? And we're finding that that's a very fertile field for us to go in recruiting new radio amateurs, because these are the MacGyvers, so they already have that mindset even before we've opened our mouths. So what's different between the US and the UK? And this, of course, is just from my perspective, and I hope that you'll tell me where I'm wrong and add to the list. I believe that we emphasize public service and emergency communications a bit more than you do here. We are I'm asked sometimes, Dave, why is it that amateur radio is growing in the United States? ARRL membership is growing in the United States. What can we do to emulate that? And I say, well, it's very simple. Have more natural disasters. And I know you've had your share of them recently with flooding and so on, but we get them fairly regularly, ranging from forest fires to tornadoes and hurricanes and floods and earthquakes and mudslides, and frequently, more frequently than you might expect, radio amateurs are asked to play a role in bridging communications gaps when those things occur. Another thing that's different is we have somewhat different frequency allocations. You all have been fortunate enough to get access to a couple of newer bands in the oldest part of the radio spectrum, below the AM broadcast band. And we haven't quite gotten there yet. Our Federal Communications Commission is very helpful in some ways and very slow in others, and this is one of those areas where they're proceeding very cautiously because they're not yet convinced that amateurs can operate down there without disturbing power line communications that keeps our national grid of electrical service operating. And there's no bureaucrat in Washington who wants to sign a piece of paper that eventually leads to a blackout covering half the country for some odd reason. So we've had to accept the fact that we have to go very slowly and be sure that we can persuade them that this can be done without disrupting the power system. You have a 4-meter band at 70 megahertz. We don't have a 4-meter band. We won't have a 4-meter band. It's still in the active VHF television frequency range. And even if it weren't, even if all of the TV broadcast stations went off the air on Channel 4 television, it's a frequency that the FCC has identified as what's called a TV interface device, where the output from your video game or whatever, if it's an RF output, it's going to be on one of 2 channels, and one of those channels is that one. For that reason, they haven't even allowed unlicensed wideband digital in there for increasing the reach of cell phones and other consumer broadband devices. Well, if they won't let consumer broadband devices in there, you know very well they're not going to allow amateurs in there with the sorts of power levels and antennas that we would want to use. So we're not likely to get that. However, we do have some compensation. We have a band at 222 megahertz, which is a neat part of the spectrum, very clean spectrally. Another one at 902 megahertz, which is not clean. I mean, that's in the middle of one of your GSM cell phone bands, but frequency usage in the United States is somewhat different. We march to a different drummer in a number of ways, as you may have noticed, and that's one of them. So we were able in 1979 to get access to that band because it's used in North and South America for what are called ISM devices, industrial, scientific and medical devices, which use RF energy but not for communications. And so we thought, well, you know, nobody else is going to want an allocation there because it's all messed up with that sort of interference, but we ought to be able to do something with it. So we asked for the allocation, received it, and ever since there have been more services and more services saying, oh, let us in too. So we're finding some interesting sharing issues in that band. We also have wider VHF and low UHF bands, but RSGB, if they're successful, will be looking to expand your 2-meter band, I believe. So there's some hope there for UK amateurs as well. And okay, we're allowed to run more power. On the other hand, we also have to follow very, very detailed regulations. Very, very detailed. Pages and pages about which amateurs can get into some wonderful arguments as to what the regulations mean, how they ought to be changed, and so forth and so on. I was amused the other day because there was a UK amateur, who I'm sure is not in the room, who wanted to comment to the FCC to retain a restriction that we have in the United States. And he wanted to support continuing the restriction. But the fact of the matter is, he doesn't have to observe the restriction. It doesn't exist in the UK. So it was an interesting set of logic that caused him to decide that he had to weigh in on this FCC proceeding. But hey, we're big guys. We can take it. We may have, on average, slightly bigger stations. And I'll share with you a couple of the photos that Chris took of Linda's and mine. Planning permission for most of us is a lot easier than it is for, I believe, most of you. In the town we live in, which is a fairly rural area, we have the right to put up an antenna to 60 feet as a matter of right. That's established. There is no basis on which that can be denied. And as long as we stay under 199 feet, we're likely to be able to get permission. As long as you have enough space to do it. Not your typical English garden, but yes, we do things a little differently. We do have, though, in areas where people are subject to private land use restrictions, where you purchase a home in an area, and part of the agreement when you purchase the home is that you agree to follow the rules of the homeowners association, then you are essentially signing away your rights to do what you want unless the homeowners association gives you permission. And these create a lot of very difficult situations for amateurs, and we're working on solutions to that, but it's a very, very difficult issue in the fastest growing parts of the United States where there are these sorts of developments cropping up all the time. Something else that is a very growing activity is remote operation. In other words, having your radio equipment in some distant location, possibly even shared with club members or just friends, and where your connection to your radio is through the internet. It's not like Echolink or IRLP. You're actually operating a radio. It's just that the connection between you, the operator, and the radio equipment is by the internet. And there is, of course, no actual limit to what you can do with that as long as you have a reliable internet connection. Now, getting back to the point I made in the beginning, my personal philosophy is we should try to avoid relying on the internet because we are the service that's supposed to be able to operate when the internet doesn't. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to have fun on a day-to-day basis with remote operation. If they live in one of these areas, it may be the only option that they have. So, we'll move through the next ones rather quickly. I see we're already at about the 30-minute mark. This is the ARRL centennial year. We're celebrating on the air. Every ARRL member is worth at least 1 point in our QSO party. Those who are active volunteers are worth more points. Yes, headquarters staff is also worth a few more points. But it's been a lot of fun. It's gotten a lot of people to dust off their radios, dust off their keys, and get on the air. We have W1AW, our headquarters station, that is the memorial to Hiram Percy Maxim. We are using the call sign from all 50 states and most territories. In fact, right now we're working on getting an operation from the Northern Mariana Islands. We've operated from Guantanamo Bay, the naval part of it. That came out of the blue. The commander down there, who has the authority to issue the license, said, "Well, we've never done it before, but you've never had a 100th anniversary before, so why not?" So W1AW/KG4 was put on the air for a few days earlier this year. There have been over 1.3 million contacts made with the call sign from almost all 50 states, and we will hit 50 states in August. We got special permission from the FCC to use the call sign W100AW, and we're using that only from Newington and from some regional convention operations. I have to tell you, it was a lot tougher for us to get W100AW than it was for the RSGB to get the 100 RSGB call signs that were used last year. As for exactly what was involved in getting it, I'm sworn to secrecy. Regional conventions we have going on in 6 parts of the country. The big event is in 3 weeks in Hartford, Connecticut, where ARRL was founded in 1914. And we will have a convention, a national convention, to be remembered. And if you happen to be in the Hartford area 3 weeks from now, be sure to come by because it is going to be a very, very special event. We're also running articles, of course, about the history of amateur radio and QST every month. We have a couple of books that we've published pulling the history out of the pages of QST, which has been published since 1915 with a short break during the First World War. And all of the ARRL's activities, and I'll go through this very quickly, are built on one of 5 pillars. I've already talked about public service a lot. Advocacy on behalf of amateur radio is my major personal focus. We use education and training, not only to train radio amateurs, but also to use amateur radio in the classroom, something I know that the RSGB has been active in as well. We promote technology. We have a fine ARRL laboratory and staff, and a lot of extremely talented people in the membership who are willing to share their enthusiasms without worrying about patents and copyrights and so on. They just want to share what they have done with the rest of the amateur community. And of course, it's all based on membership. Without members, ARRL doesn't exist. And most of what ARRL does isn't done by my headquarters staff in Newington. It's done by volunteer members all across the country. So this is public service, our advocacy activities, some of our education programs, some of our technology, and finally, our services to members. There's a, in between, I'm the balding guy on the left in the photo, if you can see the photo. The person in the middle is a young woman whose father is on the right side of the photo. She is, well, formerly Andrea Hartledge. She just got married and is now Andrea Wayward. But she's KG4IUM. She became an active radio amateur at the age of about 12. And when she turned 21 and therefore was eligible to run in a competitive election for the position of vice director of the ARRL, she decided to run for vice director. And this was of the Southeastern Division, which is 14,000 members in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Florida is often referred to as God's waiting room, so you know that there's a lot of, let's say, older amateurs there. And I was really proud of the members of the Southeastern Division because they overwhelmingly elected Andrea, age 21, as their vice director. And so it speaks to not only the fact that we do have enthusiastic young people who are willing to step forward and take responsibility, but also that we have in our members, even those of us who are getting on in years, who recognize the need and the value of supporting and promoting young people as they pursue amateur radio. What brought them into amateur radio may be quite different from what brought me in 52 years ago, from what brought you in. But it is what amateur radio will be in the future. Okay, a couple of quick shots of the ham shack. This is Chris, G0DWV, who I think comes to these meetings once in a while. And he visited Linda and me May a year ago, and so this is our shack. That's just to prove that I was there. Mostly what Chris wanted to take pictures of was outside. And I have to say, first of all, Linda and I are fortunate. We have 15 acres, mostly wooded in a rural area. Our nearest neighbor is about 600 feet away. And so we're not under a lot of restrictions out where we are. So the first thing that you see when you come up the drive is the tower that supports the 20-meter antenna, which is a set of stacked 4-element 20-meter Yagis with a 6-meter beam on top. So Chris had to take a peek at that. That's a little closer look at those antennas. They're actually nothing very special about the antennas, but having a stack of them really does help. This is another tower. This has a 2-element 40-meter beam and a 6-element 10-meter beam. There's some other fixed Yagis mounted on the side of that tower for other bands. The third tower is the VHF tower and has a 15-meter beam on it. That thing mounted on the side was my attempt to get a better signal to Clipperton Island on 24 megahertz. Didn't work out too well, but I haven't gotten around to taking it down yet. And yes, I do my own climbing and installing of antennas. And Linda hasn't told me I can't yet, so I keep doing it. But the one that Chris appreciated, and you know how some people in midlife, okay, I got to midlife when I was 63, but some people in midlife, they buy a sports car or do something else Well, mine was to put up a real 40-meter beam. So this is 130 feet. It's a 4-element 40-meter beam on top, and there's a set of Linda's antenna is mounted on the side. It's a 4-stack of 4-element 10-meter beams. So we have 16 elements pointed at Hyde Park on 10 meters. And so if you happen to be operating Bicycle Mobile from Hyde Park, you're likely to hear K1ZZ in a 10-meter phone contest. So we have a lot of fun with that. And but I also have to say, I had just as much fun putting the K3 in a backpack, literally, taking it to Puerto Rico with a spool of wire, tossing it up in a tree, and working the world from there over a week's vacation. So it's really not necessary to have all this hardware to enjoy amateur radio. But at times it does help. So if you're in the Newington area, either July 17 to 19 or any other time, please come visit us at ARRL headquarters. Visit the Maxim Memorial Station, W1AW. You can operate the station, show your license to the station manager. And we are very, very pleased to be of what service we can be to the amateur community worldwide. So there's the, whoops. Well, that was the www.arrl.org. Let's just leave it at that. And I will turn this over to a more confident operator. Any questions? I know there was at least one.
Yeah, I was going to say, but if you can, would you mind waiting for the microphone to reach you? That means that people at home can also hear the questions asked. So, can I have the first question? Someone must have a question. Okay, I'll turn to Roger first.
Dave, I've been reading on the rooted reflector, you know what I'm going to say, about the RM11708, is it?
Yes.
What is all that about exactly? Because I don't quite understand it from here. There seems to be a lot of kerfuffle and a lot of anti about it.
Yeah, that's interesting because that was the proceeding I mentioned where a UK amateur decided he wanted to weigh in. It's a very odd thing because there is actually very little to it. Right now in the United States, HF data emissions are regulated on the basis of the telephone modems that were in use in the late 1970s. They're defined, the limits are defined by symbol rate, which at the time was the same as bit rate, but with current technology, it isn't any longer. And so the proposal, it's a very simple proposal. It's just to delete the reference to symbol rate and insert a bandwidth limit that would limit HF data transmissions to the bandwidths that HF data transmissions are already using on a day-to-day basis. It seems that that ought to be relatively non-controversial. And why it has developed into a, as you say, kerfuffle is a complete mystery to me. It makes absolutely no sense. There are, in most other countries, there's no such symbol rate limit. There is often no bandwidth limit. In the UK, you don't have a bandwidth limit. We're proposing to put a bandwidth limit in before data systems become developed that use more bandwidth than that, because we'd like to limit the bandwidth to something less than the limits of the band. And why this is seen as a threat to other operators using other modes, I can't begin to explain it. It's completely irrational.
You mentioned JT. Some of those modes on HF are not really suitable for HF, are they? Because they're supposed to be subaudible, really, most of them in any case. And they've caused a lot of aggro on the EME reflectors and
oh, yes.
employers.
Yes. If
The BARTG people are now getting castigated about using Britty on a JT frequency on 40 metres. And if we can't hear anybody, how do we know the frequencies in use?
It's that is actually a serious issue, and it is in some way related to the previous issue. Yes, there are modes, and NPSK31 is in this category, where you can get a usable signal at a level that you would not, by ear, many people at least would not be able to tell there was a signal there. But you can see it on the screen, and your equipment can decipher it and show you the message that's being sent. Now, if one of us who's not operating that mode tunes around that frequency, doesn't hear anything, sends, is this frequency in use? Nothing heard because the other operator isn't tuned to CW. There's going to be a conflict. And we need to work out a better arrangement for separating these incompatible modes into different parts of the band. This, though, has to be done by radio amateurs themselves. There's no way that if we asked the FCC to do it, that we would like the answer that they gave. And you all wouldn't have to pay any attention to it anyway. So that's one of the functions of the IARU, is to try to establish voluntary guidelines that will guide almost every amateur. I mean, there's always the odd duck who just wants to do things his own way, but mostly band plans are observed by amateurs. And in September, IARU Region 1 will be meeting in Bulgaria, and all of the national amateur radio societies in Region 1 will come together and will review the band plan and figure out how to deal with exactly those sorts of issues. And RSGB will be there, and you'll have good representation by your national society. The ARRL currently has a band planning committee working on that very issue on our side of the pond.
Okay, right.
Dave, I want to talk about CW, if I may. Approximately, I should think, 15–20% of our membership here use CW, including myself. And as you know, the UK and many other countries abandoned the need for CW in order to achieve a full license here some years ago. I think the same applies in the USA, but wonder if you could clarify that for me. And also, what do the ARRL do to encourage CW? Because I get the impression that CW is a growing thing over in North America.
Yes, and I think it also is in Europe that it's growing. In the interest of full disclosure, I will say right up front, I am a CW operator. 90% of my on-the-air activity is on CW. That doesn't make me special, it just means that's what I like to do. Because I learned it at age 13 and it came very naturally, and it's just, I spent more hours communicating by Morse code while I was in high school than I did talking to people. It was my answer to text messaging before there was text messaging. So I value CW, and if you went around the ARRL board table, you would find a number of people who are very dedicated CW operators. In 2006, the FCC removed the requirement for Morse code as a licensing requirement for any class of amateur license. We were a little late doing that in the US. Other countries, many other countries did it ahead of us. To me, that was a great relief, because I no longer had to defend Morse code as a rite of passage, as a hazing ritual in order to join the amateur radio community. Because we had, at that time and today, a lot of young people who are interested in software, they're interested in data communications, as we talked about here. they want to pursue those interests and telling them, well, right, so first of all, the thing you have to do is to learn this code that was invented by Samuel Morse in 1840 something or other. There was cognitive dissonance there. And now I can promote Morse code on the basis of its virtues, on the basis of its strengths. It is the only code that is decipherable by both man and machine. It's the ideal way for us to communicate, whether we're communicating directly or we're communicating through a digital interface of some kind. For that reason, I believe that Morse code has a bright future, because until humans change their data processing techniques, we're unlikely to come up with another mode of communication that performs that function. And of course, you know, for CW operators, if you're using simple equipment, small antennas, low power, it is a very efficient way. You can make lots of contacts with not much of a station. Now, you can also do that with the aforementioned HF data modes as well, and moon bounce. You know, I didn't get into the moon bounce thing, but yeah, you have the folks who say, well, if I didn't hear it with my own ears, it didn't happen. Well, okay, but if we took that approach to radio astronomy, we certainly wouldn't know much about the universe. So I think there is a place for all of this in the scope of amateur radio. Now, what ARRL is doing to promote CW, we continue to sponsor events, on-the-air operating events. We've just published a book on Morse code. I think RSGB has done the same. And we continue to send CW code practice on the air from W1AW. We're trying to encourage people to learn the code at a conversational speed rather than at the 5 words a minute speed that, in my mind, was counterproductive. Because if you learn Morse code at the speed where you can count out the dots and dashes, you will never get the rhythm of the code. So we're now trying to teach it at a faster clip. So, you know, you may only get 10% of it the first time you hear it, but the next time you'll get 15% and so on. So that's what we're trying to do. Other questions?
Before we have any more questions from the floor, if I just remind everybody now watching at home, we have 40 people now watching this at home. And there's somebody called Harold, WJ1B. Would you know him?
No.
You're not his boss?
He's a troublemaker.
Okay, so
hello, Harold.
Harold is at the ARRL HQ. And everybody at home, if you have a question for David, now would be a good time to send them. If you can put your call sign first, and then the question, and then we'll put those questions to David now.
Yes, and seriously, Harold is the Chief Operating Officer of ARRL.
So he's his boss, or is he your boss?
I'm his boss.
Oh, right. That's the right way. That's the line.
Dave, Steve G0KYA. I'm lucky enough to have an American Extra Class license as well. One thing that's always not bugged me about it, I have to have an American address to have the license. And it's currently somebody's grandmother who gets bombarded with stuff from Yezo and Kenwood and can't understand what it's all about, but it doesn't matter. If you have that many licensees outside the US now, is there no way it could be changed so that we could actually use our home addresses?
It would probably be difficult, because the counter-argument would be, if you can't be reached by the FCC through the Postal Service, then they don't have the connection that they feel is necessary to a licensee. Now, as these addresses of convenience, and believe me, there are a lot more radio amateurs licensed at 684 Cedar Swamp Road, Coventry, Connecticut, than Linda and me and our daughter, including a UK amateur. Perhaps the FCC's attitude on that will change, and they'll say, well, if we can reach you electronically, that's good enough. In fact, gosh, that should be even better. But getting that change through the FCC rulemaking process would be quite a challenge. But I'll give it some thought as to how we might approach that. Because as you say, the addresses of convenience are not truly serving the purpose in many, many cases.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? There's also lots of hands going up. I'll just bring it down here.
M0VRA, Peter. You've already indicated that the high spots of the membership are in New England and Florida. Are there any low areas of membership?
Well, Peter, if I said that, I should have. I shouldn't have left that impression. The map of the United States, in terms of per capita radio amateurs, is actually fairly consistent. There are hotspots. They tend to be in technology areas. Around Boston, we have a ring road called Route 128, which has a lot of technology companies. That's a very significant area of amateur activity. The Pacific Northwest, if you think of Boeing, you'll find a lot of radio amateurs work for Boeing. Southern California, defense contractors and others. So there are definitely areas where there's a higher than average amateur population. Some of the urban areas, I would say the inner cities would tend not to have so many amateurs for various reasons, including difficulty having a station. Suburbs in those areas, though, tend to have quite strong populations. And I'm sure it varies in the UK. I imagine the Southeast has probably more amateurs than others. My wife Linda was just in Ukraine as an election observer for their presidential election for the OSCE, and she was serving in a rural area which was quite economically disadvantaged. When I found where she was posted, I immediately started looking through my logbook for contacts with that area, and I only found that I had ever worked 2 amateurs in that entire oblast. It's quite, so some of it is economically driven as well.
Thank you.
Is there any chance of combining your national field aid with our national field aid?
We have discussed that, and there are several problems associated with it. I won't go through the whole list, but one is that ours is an all-mode event, and yours separates CW and sideband. Ours is really our primary public outreach function. Our field day, although it is an on-the-air activity and there is a competitive dimension to it, most of our clubs pursue it as an opportunity to demonstrate amateur radio in their communities. And so the purposes of the 2 events are somewhat different. So that's one of the problems that we would have combining the 2.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, sorry.
Sorry, we're hogging it down the front here. Oh, he switched off. He doesn't use microphones. That's the trouble. Yeah, quick question. I get the impression that amateur radio is better known in the US, better respected in the US. What can we do in the UK to boost the face of of amateur radio and get it better known and get it respected as well as it is in your side of the pond, or on your side of the pond?
Well, you could resurrect Tony Hancock, but you probably wouldn't want to. One of my favorite lines to this day in explaining amateur radio to people is to say, I have friends all over the world, None in this country, but all over the world. That was a classic piece of comedy, but the society, RSGB, has spent decades trying to live it down because it created an image in the public eye, which, of course, every stereotype does have a certain degree of truth to it, but it's not one that we all want to be permanently branded with. We have been fortunate in being able to keep amateur radio as part of the popular culture to at least some limited extent. We have amateur radio featured in a reasonably popular situation comedy on television. Whenever there is a hurricane, there's going to be some news coverage of radio amateurs' involvement in that. We've managed, by and large, to avoid negative publicity. As for what the society can do, in politics, we often say all politics is local. In public relations, all public relations is local. It's great if we get on CNN for 2 minutes on Field Day weekend, but it's gone. It's ephemeral. It's people the following Tuesday won't remember that they saw it. If they see it in their local weekly shopper magazine, if they see a poster at the supermarket that says amateur radio meeting, amateur radio licensing class, have you ever thought of communicating with the world without a cell phone? Those are activities that really have to be done at the local level. There's no substitute for it. And so the RSGB can provide some tools for local clubs to do it, as ARRL can provide some tools, but we're kidding ourselves if we think that if we buy a 1-minute advert on the Super Bowl weekend, oh, then everyone will know about amateur radio. Well, no, they won't, because they'll forget it Tuesday morning, but we will be a lot poorer as a result. So it's all about outreach at the very personal local level. Talking to friends about sharing your passion. People understand enthusiasms. They generally, if you have a positive passion about something you're doing in radio, if you share that with others, they'll get it. If they don't get it, well, probably wouldn't add much to our community if they did join. So one of our other ARRL officials is fond of saying amateur radio is not for everyone, and I do think that's true. I think it should be available to everyone. I think that the barriers to entry should be sufficiently low that someone with some desire, some motivation, can get that first license, because it's the license to learn. It's not, that's not the objective. The license is not the objective. The objective is what you can do with the license, and finding more things that people can do with the license is, I think, part of what we need to do in outreach. So I hope that's an answer.
Dave, before we go any more for questions on the floor, we do have a question now online. You were talking about embracing digital technology and the internet, not relying on it, but maybe this has enabled at least 40 people to see this tonight.
Right.
And John EI7IG has asked this. I believe various disasters in the recent past have led to a larger influx of amateurs into the hobby in North America. Does Dave have any feel, anecdotally or otherwise, whether these operators have progressed through to other aspects of the hobby or stayed within their niche?
That's a very good question, John. And most people who come into amateur radio with the public service and emergency communications bent, to be honest, they don't advance beyond that. But they do develop skills that serve that particular function. That, for example, and in fact, I'll use a European example. In December, there was a very severe ice storm in Slovenia that took down a lot of their electric power and telecommunications infrastructure. And the Slovenian and Austrian amateurs on the other side of the Alps set up an HF data link that turned out to be one of the significant communications links that was used to restore power and communications. That has raised the visibility of amateur radio in that part of Europe. And one would hope that through logical progression, if people say, oh, I want to be part of that, they will join radio clubs, they will learn that there is more to it, and that there is a lot of different channels to pursue, different activities to pursue. Realistically, will everyone who comes in with that motivation become, go to the top of the DXCC honor roll or whatever your measure of personal achievement might be? No. And that really shouldn't be our expectation. It shouldn't be the standard by which we measure whether these are contributing amateurs. I'll tell you that the amateurs who turned out for the Boston Marathon last year didn't think that they would be performing the role that they ended up performing. But they were motivated to serve the public. They came out with their handheld radios, and by gosh, they served the public.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from here on the floor? Any other questions? Have you another?
No.
Steve? Any other questions? Okay. Well, Dave and Linda, thank you both very much again for coming over here this evening to see us. We know it is a very push schedule for you. I think one of the reasons there aren't loads and loads of questions is you've covered so much, and that's the truth. I thought particularly interesting was that maybe the biggest lead interest into your hobby is through public service, and maybe there's a lesson that we can take from that, because we have had our recent disasters, particularly with the weather in this country, and maybe we should take a lead from that and try and encourage groups like RayNet and 4x4 Response, to use that. But we thank you very much, both of you, for coming here tonight. We hope you'll come and see us again when maybe you've got a bit more time to enjoy the UK and Norfolk, and we'd love to show you around then as well. Well,
thank you very much, David. And I'd like to leave you with a little token of our 100th anniversary.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed.
David,
let's thank David very much. And I think David and Linda will stay for a little longer. Maybe if you'd like to come and have a personal chat with David and Linda, they'll be doing that as well. Thank you also to those of you watching at home. As I said, there are over 40 of you now watching. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, let us know. I'd like to also, at this particular moment, say special thanks to Mark, who, along with Kevin and I, we've spent quite a lot of midnight oil the last few days doing this. We've never done it before. But if you liked it at home, then maybe we'll do other talks like it in the future. Thanks also very much to Robert, who's professionally video recorded the evening for us tonight. So once again, thank you very much to all of you for coming, for you watching at home. And also, don't forget, there are books up here, including QST from the ARRL, and some leaflets on the Hamfest and the Barford Rally. Thank you very much.